Good afternoon. This is the February LibsWork meeting, and I'm Hillary Ritt with the Department for Libraries and Archives in Kentucky. I'm pleased to be facilitating today. Thank you for Andrea letting me host today and in her stead. I am also pleased to introduce our speaker today, Kimberly Wickert. She is from Retain Kentucky. And briefly, we'll let you know about her. Kimberly has been helping individuals, employers, and organizations in the Remain and Return to Work process for over 20 years. She is a member of the Inclusive Job Description Team from the University of Kentucky's Human Development Institute. And she was awarded the 2023 Sarah Bennett Holmes Award by the University of Kentucky Women's Forum. She's been working in the space, as I said, for 20 years, and look forward to hearing from her today. So thank you, Kimberly, for being with us, and I'll let you take it over.
Thank you very much, Hillary, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you all can see my slide. Okay.
Excellent. Yep.
Perfect. As Hillary mentioned, my name is Kimberly Wickert. I am a mid-career female with blonde hair and glasses. Today I am wearing, in honor of Valentine's Day tomorrow, I'm wearing a pink sweater with a white collar, and I have a blue background that has Retain Kentucky on it. So that is my visual description. And thank you for letting me spend some time with you today to talk about inclusive communication techniques. I would welcome your participation if you have any questions. And Hillary, if you don't mind helping me monitor the chat and letting me know as those questions come up. One of the ways that we can be inclusive is to go ahead and answer those questions as they happen. So just let me know, because with my screen looking at my slides, I don't know that I'll see them. So today my objectives are to allow you to hear the definition of inclusive communication and talk about strategies to implement inclusive communication in recruitment and retention of employees, but it can also be in recruitment and retention of library patrons. And then also to interact to improve awareness, knowledge, and understanding of communication support through these inclusive communication techniques. So I do want to share a little bit about Retain Kentucky. We are a grant funded by the Department of Labor. As Hillary mentioned, I sit at the University of Kentucky Human Development Institute, but the grant is actually owned and led by Kentucky's Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And we were fortunate enough to have them identify us as their partner, and we implement the grant, which is a research study. And in order for someone to be eligible, they must be 18 years of age and live anywhere in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, not have applied for or receiving supplemental security income or Social Security disability income. They either need to be currently employed or have worked in the last 12 months and have a non-work related illness or injury. We do we're one of 5 states that were awarded this grant back in 2021. So it's Kansas, Kentucky, Minnesota, Ohio, and Vermont are the 5 states throughout the country that have funding from the Department of Labor to be able to research early intervention strategies for people with illness and injury to be able to stay at work or to return to work. And I'll send this slide deck as well as the resources that I talk about today and a brochure about Retain Kentucky. If you sit in a state that also has Retain in your state, you can look up Retain through the Department of Labor and find out more information about the eligibility criteria for your state. But in Kentucky, people can call us, they can scan the QR code, they can email us, or they can go to our website at kyretain.org to be able to refer themselves, or if they're a healthcare provider, employer, or workforce professional, they can actually refer one of their patients or clients or consumers. So this is the way that it can occur. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and talk about a user manual. And one of the ways that we can be inclusive in our communication is really by letting people know what our preferred ways are to have people communicate with us, or how we prefer to communicate with others. And this is a really interesting thing. So there's an organization or company called Biodex that created this user manual that they recommend using for teammates. And it's designed to empower diverse teams to be able to work efficiently and effectively together. And in an organization, when new colleagues join a team, there's usually a getting to know you period. And that can be kind of stressful and maybe even inefficient for the group as a whole, while people figure out how to work with each other. And this can be especially true for diverse teams where colleagues can represent a wide range of work experiences, social norms, or learning styles. And even more so for teams that are kind of spread out, or where it's hard, like virtually right now, where we're all learning together, trying to read a team member's reaction. Because you may not be able to walk over to their desk, or even pick up the phone and talk to them. So a few years ago, a team member at Ultranauts posed this simple question: would it be great if we all had a user manual that we can use? And that created this Biodex, a tool that contains 28 data points about each team member's communication or preferences as to how they like to be communicated with. And it helps colleagues, supervisors, leaders, managers, everyone to be able to better understand how to work with them. So I know I'm someone who tends to be pretty direct in my communication, and sometimes people I think sometimes being direct can sometimes cause concern for people. But I think knowing that upfront, that I'm just really direct, there's no hidden agenda with me, has really helped my team, especially those who report up through me, to know, oh, that's what I can expect. So at the Human Development Institute and Retain, we developed a definition of an inclusive workforce. And since we help people stay at work or return to work, I listed this definition here. And it is that inclusive communication contributes to an inclusive workforce. And with our current challenge of recruitment and retention, which employers have across the country, I wanted to share this with you because it's an important piece of knowledge that helps to promote that inclusive communication. So it says that an inclusive workforce is one in which the unique skills, contributions, and diversity of qualified individuals, including those with disabilities, are actively recruited, valued, and integral for success. It's an environment where the engagement, development, retention, and advancement of an increasingly skilled and diverse workforce is promoted and supported across all employment sectors and levels. So inclusive communication recognizes that people understand and express themselves differently, and promotes sharing information in a way that everybody understands. So one of the things that you may have noticed is that I introduce myself in my visual description, because if you have somebody who may have a visual considerations, they may be calling into a meeting, they would not know who I am or what I look like. So that's why I do that if I'm in a meeting, either virtually via screens like this today, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, or phone call, so that people can have a better understanding because I've provided that visual description of myself. Communicating in an inclusive way helps positively impact the outcome of education, processes, and services. And we know that people process and perceive communication differently, and that they can benefit from inclusive communication in all environments. So providing clear communication not only promotes accessibility, but can promote safety and productivity for everyone. And I'm going to give you some examples of that in a little bit. So in your environment and in your role, you may be thinking, how can I promote inclusive communications? Again, at Retain, we help people stay at work or return to work. So we're looking at that in the workplace first and foremost, but we are also looking at that in every environment, in the healthcare environment, in the education environment. Those are also areas where people who want to stay at work or return to work need to feel included as they're working through those barriers to do so. And oftentimes they're working with their healthcare providers to identify ways that they can get treatment and stay at work or return to work. Or maybe they are getting additional education so that they can improve their skill set and maybe move into a different role in the workplace. So just because my focus today in this presentation may allude to the workplace, obviously we want to promote inclusive communication everywhere. And I talk about in recruitment and retention because we are looking at helping people in the workforce get recruited into the workplace and retain those jobs. And I like this quote from Reverend Jesse Jackson. He said, when everyone is included, everyone wins. And how we communicate is the first step in developing and maintaining a culture of inclusion. How employers communicate in recruitment efforts impacts the outcome, and approaching this in an inclusive manner will increase your chances of getting a larger pool of applicants. And, you know, in your environment, recruiting patrons into the library, obviously inclusive communication could assist with that as well.
Kimberly, we've got a question in the chat, actually.
That's perfect.
Lisa in Maine, she's the Maine State Library, would like to learn more about compiling a Biodex user manual. She wanted to know how that was done, and or if there was a link to what you shared.
Absolutely, there is, and I have it on my resource page on the end of this slide deck. And what I'll do before we, when we get there, what I'll do is I'll copy and paste those resources in the chat as well. But I can send this actual slide deck PowerPoint out to you, Hillary, to share with everybody. And that way you can cut and paste from that too. Will that work?
That sounds great. Yes. Lisa is saying thank you. This is wonderful.
Okay,
thank
perfect.
you.
Any other questions? I can stop for a minute just in case anybody else wants to take a minute and put something in the chat.
I don't see anything else.
So this next slide talks about using local language. And to me, it was a little bit of a kind of maybe an oxymoron to a certain extent, because you want to be inclusive, but then we talk about using local language. But what we're referring to here is localization, incorporating the social and cultural aspects of the population with whom you are working or targeting that speak that target language. So when you are writing information about activities going on within your library system, or I might write advertisements or help employers write advertisements for jobs. You want to do that in, languages and also varieties where you're advertising, and localize that text to the intended pool of applicants. And I'll give you another example. So we're going to talk a little bit about avoiding using industry jargon or acronyms. And when you are reaching out to the people that you want to include in your communication and be all inclusive, you don't want to alienate them by using language that they may not be familiar with. So you want to find out what their local language is for that information and include that. So my husband was in the utility industry for many, many years, and they used a lot of acronyms. And we were finding that some of the acronyms that I used in my industry as a rehabilitation counselor were the same letters, but meant very different things. So it's important that if you're going to use some of that, that you spell it out or define it so that you can include everybody, and they're not just going to be avoiding participating in something that you're offering because they don't understand it.
This is another question, Kimberly, and related to this. What are ways to identify local language?
So when you are putting together something that's marketing or education, what you want to do, and we'll talk about this in a few slides too, is that you want to look at the literacy levels to make sure that you're speaking to people in those levels that they're going to understand. One of the things that you want to look at, again, I would go back to those acronyms, and I'll give you an example. I worked in corporate America for a couple of decades before I came to Retain. Well, in corporate America, ROI stood for return on investment, but we use ROI in Retain to mean release of information, something that we have to get from our participants to be able to share information with their healthcare providers or employers. So when you're using that, kind of probably I would go to somebody who is in that local area, look at the demographically who you might have within your system that sits in that part of your state, and make sure that the language that you're using is, appropriate to that part of the state. And hopefully that makes sense. I know, even different parts of the country use different terms for things. I had the opportunity to vacation down south, and just an example is soda or pop. That's very different. That's a local language, and different parts of the country refer to that drink as soda or pop. And to me, if somebody said soda, I think of bubbly, fizzy water, because I think of pop normally. So just another example, and hopefully that kind of helps differentiate a little bit more. The other thing I would say is that we found in Kentucky, in some of the more rural areas of our Commonwealth, people responded to a survey if it were physically provided to them in person, by mail, or even at a community event, but they did not respond to that via kind of sending something out, asking them to click on a link in the internet. So think about those things as far as local language as well. For some people, I know we had folks who would put things on a community bulletin board at a local grocery store, and they felt very comfortable, getting that information and then being able to say, oh yeah, I'd like to participate in this, and they would act on it. So you really need to find out, who your patrons or participants are comfortable with and provide it. And that might be in a variety of ways, but just make sure you don't rule out the way that is going to engage everybody and be most inclusive. Any other questions, Hillary, on that?
I don't think so, but there was a comment about the use of acronyms. Yes, that's an agreement with you.
Absolutely. The other thing that I would say as far as inclusivity is avoid gendered language. Gender binary is still a prevalent concept in many societies. However, we as humans are incredibly gender diverse, and some languages, such as English, have pronouns that may or may not cover the range of this diversity. So adopting gender neutral language is one way we can increase inclusivity in our communication. So I know for us, when we're trying to help employers post job descriptions or job postings, sometimes the words that you use may lead people to believe that it's more a preferred job for one gender over another. So examples could be like, instead of using the word fireman, use firefighter, or craftsman, you want to use craft person. I know a lot of times people will say things like manpower and maybe use something like staff instead. So those are just some examples of how you can avoid gendered language. And there's also a gender decoder that we use for job ads, and this is in my resources as well. But it doesn't even have to be for an ad. This is at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and you can put your language in this link, and it'll tell you if it is gender neutral or not. And I think it's kind of a fun way to be able to see if the language you're using is subtly gender coded. And this site tells us that society has certain expectations of what men and women are like, how they differ, and how this kind of gets into the language that we use. And they give the example, the terms bossy and feisty are almost never used as words to describe men. And so those are things that you can put in there to see if there's some kind of gender decoding that you can do. And again, this is really used to look at subtle bias in job advertisements, but you could probably put anything in here if you're putting out, something about an activity or an event that you're holding to determine, if it is gender neutral. So I feel like I'm to use the term preaching to the choir, so to speak, because this next one talks about be aware of literacy exclusion. And when we say literacy inclusion, we want to include people with all different levels of literacy. And this is also a good way to ensure you're not being ageist or unintentionally overlooking younger applicants. Our literacy levels do change as we age. They usually broaden and improve. And we know that good content is accessible content. So we want to be able to write in an accessible way as much as possible. And ways that we can do that are by keeping sentences and paragraphs short, using what we call white space to reduce visual noise, and the complexity of the text. For example, the length of sentences and complex phrases can make the information difficult to understand. So as well as ensuring that the content that we use appeals to as wide of an audience as possible, we want to make sure that it's readable as well. And you can enlist the services of an expert in text analysis to have your documents measured for their content and accessibility and readability. or you can use numerous tools like Hemingway, Editor, or Grammarly. Those are all available online to help with this. I see some more things in the chat. Any questions? And again, I feel like maybe you all are more of an expert on literacy than I am, but anything in there, Hillary?
There's discussion about the link to the gender decoder, and I think Mark has been able to put that in there for us quickly.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
So the other thing, in order to be inclusive, we want to be cognizant of how somebody processes things cognitively. And by making your information complex to understand with high levels of literacy required to decode them, that really is excluding people with different levels of literacy, but also potentially excluding people who have maybe a learning disorder, but would really be able to be successful in functioning in a job or in an event that you may be hosting, and you want to be able to include these individuals. We found a study with individuals with dyslexia reported standardized job descriptions and hiring processes sometimes stop them from applying for certain jobs. And when at least 10% of the US population has dyslexia, that's a lot of potential candidates that people are ruling out and could be unintentionally kind of closing that door for them. Typically, people who have learning disorders like dyslexia specifically have a challenge with processing written language, and the level of literacy is related to how much language or what level of language you can process. Some ways that are really simple that we can help to do this is to change the font. And so the British Dyslexia Association actually advises using sans serif fonts like Arial, Comic Sans Verdana, Tahoma, Century Gothic, or Open Sans, because those are easier to read. Even things like underlining texts or italics can cause crowding on the page, and that makes the written text more difficult to process. So they recommend using bold for emphasis instead of underlining. So with inclusivity, we also want to share how an individual's preference as to how they would like to share and receive information. And people with disabilities may also have preferences about the language used with them when referring to their disability. And being respectful of those preferences is important. So there are two ways that people with disabilities tend to refer to themselves and like to be referred to. And there's person first and identity first language. And in person first language, people are referred to as obviously, in person first language, disabilities are a characteristic and not the identity of the person. So an example would include a person with a disability or an individual with quadriplegia. People who prefer identity first language don't see their disabilities as separate from who they are. So examples include terms like deaf person, blind person, and autistic person. So it's okay to ask what their preference is. I know a couple of decades ago when I was pursuing my master's degree in rehab counseling, we really were taught only to use person first language. And the only exception at that time was the deaf community. People who were deaf preferred to be seen as deaf, and they would even sign with a capital D. But that's changed. And there are other groups that prefer that identity first language. So it's okay to ask. And there are 2 links here where you can learn more about all of this. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about individual communication strategies. Our workforce is aging, and as employers, we're relying on older workers to fill positions now more than ever. You may find that your library patrons, as they come in, you're looking to serve individuals as well who are older workers or older patrons. And so specific to inclusive communication for our aging workforce, we need to be sensitive to age-related hearing loss. Technically, that's referred to as presbycusis, and it's the gradual loss of hearing in both ears. It's a common problem that's linked to aging, and 1 in 3 adults over the age of 65 has hearing loss. So for someone with hearing loss or who is deaf, the strategies that I'm going to talk about can improve communication. And you can see here on this slide, you want to have that person's attention before you start speaking to them. It's okay to kind of, tap them on the shoulder if their back is to you. If you are working with someone who is hard of hearing or deaf, they may even ask you if you're in a setting, a large meeting area that there's a lot of people talking. You can flash the lights, move into their field of vision, and ask what their communication preferences are. Again, it's okay to ask. It's important to look at the person that you're speaking to and to make eye contact. The other thing is to speak at a normal pace. You don't have to slow your pace of speaking down. You can rephrase things if you find the first few attempts don't work. And contrary to what at least my parents taught me, it is okay to point to things if necessary. Be aware if there's background lighting that could make it hard to see your face. I know we often have American Sign Language interpreters who participate in some of our trainings and meetings. And not only do we pin them in these virtual meetings, meaning they're always able to be seen along with the speaker, but I find that they often will have a dark or a black background, and a lot of times they will wear a black shirt, so their face and their hands can be easily seen as they're interpreting, especially virtually. You also want to, and this just sounds like it makes sense, but you really do want to minimize background noise. So if you know that there's going to be a room that would be better served to have an in-person meeting where maybe the HVAC system, the heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and cooling system isn't really loud, that would be a good thing. Or if there's a certain day of the week that the landscapers show up to cut your grass outside of your meeting rooms, you might want to avoid those types of days to, have in-person meetings. If you're doing it virtually, having the ability to, mute people who aren't speaking obviously is important, because that's really going to minimize background noise. And ask people, if you're not speaking, go ahead and mute yourself, please. We talk about using plain language when speaking and writing, and there are a lot of ways that we can do that. I mentioned earlier, keep your sentences and your paragraphs short. People can use technology to type back and forth if they, don't understand something. They can do it with their tablet or messenger text, however, in the Zoom chat, that type of thing. Use interpreters or other accommodations when requested, and ask that individual what works best for them. If it's somebody who lip breathes. They really need to see facial expressions and know that body language. Those are all ways that we can increase accessibility. Behaviors that we can avoid if you're working with someone who is hard of hearing or deaf is yelling or exaggerating the pronunciation. Make sure, and we all are aware when we were wearing masks a while back, covering your mouth obviously is something that makes it very difficult for somebody who has hearing considerations to be able to understand. The other thing is speaking with things in your mouth like gum, food, or toothpicks. People with sensory differences or conditions like anxiety or PTSD might find it difficult to attend meetings or activities for several reasons. There may be something that may trigger their might be stimuli that may increase their symptoms, or being unexpectedly asked to participate in a meeting, potentially crowded conditions. I know I was with a friend recently who shared, since the pandemic, she gets really anxious being in large crowds, and she finds herself avoiding concerts or, any kind of event where she is in large crowds. So allowing people to know what to expect in a meeting situation can really help them to prepare and maybe even ask for ways that they can participate more fully. They can ask for accommodation needs or preferences prior to those meetings, and that really will increase the ability to have an inclusive meeting. Ways that you can do that is having written directions, any kind of checklists that you can provide of what they should do if the meeting is in person, preparation prior to that they can do before they show up, checklists with symbols for individuals who may have augmentative or alternative communication needs. Other ways is that you can ask what their communication needs are prior to the meeting, and send out any kind of agendas, reading materials, slide deck, closed captioning as a backup. If you have someone who has that, we find that it's not 100% accurate, but it does help. And usually with Zoom, people can turn on or off their transcript closed captioning option as well. Other ways that we can help people, and I see another comment or question in the chat. Hillary, was there something that I need to address?
That Mark was agreeing with you. The agendas are
Okay.
definitely helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you. One speaker at a time. I know this seems very obvious, but I have heard from people who really not just have communication needs, but people who may be neurodivergent, people who have anxiety, even someone who I met that had vertigo said if there's too much going on at once, that really was an issue. And so making sure that people know we're going to have one speaker at a time, and this is how we will identify who that is. Raise your hand if it's in person or even virtually. Wait to be called on before speaking. Make sure you're muted when you're not speaking. When you do have the ability to do introductions, do that when it's possible. That really helps so people can communicate more effectively. Like today, you put your name, state in the display. That's really helpful too. Use the chat, record, and transcript functions, and have a note taker if needed as well, because that can really help with communication. Most software includes that chat function, and that's a good option if somebody wants to have some sidebar conversations. We're doing that today, and that's great. It also provides an opportunity for the person who's not comfortable speaking to communicate with the team. We work with people I've mentioned that are neurodivergent or maybe have some augmentative communication needs. And I was actually in a meeting yesterday where somebody said, I feel much more comfortable participating and communicating via the chat option than taking myself off mute and saying it, in front of the group as a whole. So offer that option. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how many people are more comfortable communicating if they can do it via that chat or question and answer feature. Auto captioning in slides can assist for those who may not be able to hear the speaker clearly. You can even use the polling option in Zoom to be able to reach a consensus during a meeting. And that really is another way that people feel included. I talked earlier about as you have questions or comments, another way to be inclusive is to address those as those come up. So some people say, well, we're going to wait till the end to take questions. From an inclusivity perspective, if you do have people who have learning disorders or augmentative communication needs, really allowing them to contribute at the time where you're talking about that topic is much more inclusive than waiting till the end of the presentation. Now, that being said, if you do have something that you're going to be covering at a certain point in the presentation, you can acknowledge, I see your question about this, and maybe even give a very brief answer, but say, I'm going to elaborate on that later in my presentation. But you really want to make them feel included by acknowledging that they've contributed at that point in time. As far as inclusivity, and sometimes there are terms, I have a friend who is legally blind, and some people might say, is it okay to say see you later to somebody who doesn't have vision, who is blind? It's okay. Or to say, something about walking around the mall, or let's go for a walk around someone who may use a mobility device and may not be walking independently. And that's okay to use those common terms and phrases. The other way that you can be more inclusive is if you repeat questions from audience members when needed. And this is especially true if you're in an in-person large group or even in hybrid groups. So you may have some people who are in a room, but then you may have other people who are calling in or Zooming in virtually. And so it's really important if somebody asks a question to go ahead and repeat that so that everybody can hear what that question is. And again, I mentioned using written directions, checklists for people who may have augmentative or alternative communication needs. And a great way to be able to make everybody feel included is using those polling options. So ways that you can enhance accessibility is to use plain language, literal language, and check the readability of your writing. And I'm going to give you some resources for that as well. And I had alluded to that industry jargon or acronyms. And sometimes you can find someone again, I'm going back to employment in the workplace. Sometimes people may be looking for a job and they have what we call transferable skills. So skills that would transfer from one industry to the other. But they may not know that because there may be too much jargon in the ads, or maybe in an event that you are trying to get patrons to come to. And so you don't want to exclude those people because you're using that jargon. And I had mentioned earlier, my husband was in the electric utility industry for many years. And some of the things that they used as industry jargon is CAN, and a CAN refers to an electric transformer. A bucket truck they refer to as a cherry picker. So you could see where somebody might think, oh gosh, I'm showing, I'm applying for a job where I'm going to be a cherry picker. I mean, that's in the agricultural industry. Why are we talking, about that for an electric position? The other thing was pothead. That's an underground and overhead conductors where they join. hot sticks are where people pull fuses. So you can see where that could be confusing, but you may have somebody in this case who worked for years in another utility industry, maybe, in the gas industry, or even, the communication utilities. And a lot of those skills may transfer, but they may not feel like they can apply if somebody were to use a lot of heavy industry jargon. So for plain language that I mentioned, what we want to include is really what the reader needs to know, what the reader needs to do, and provide only that information. I think, sometimes I tend to get really flowery with my writing, and I have to go back and really look at what does plain language dictate, and really just kind of cut down to what that reader needs to know, how they need to do it, and really keep it simple to that information. It's easier if we use visuals for someone with a disability to understand. So visuals with plain language really elevates it to that next level to be inclusive. And it's easier for people who speak English as a second language to understand. So we're really including those individuals as well. And it's also easier for everyone to read and grasp with a quick look. And I'm going to give you an example here. This was put out by the CDC, and it shows you, this is very much an example of plain language. How to wash your hands, and it has the visuals. It's very simple: wet, get soap, scrub, rinse, dry, and all of the visuals with it. So that's a really good way to get information across. And just in the next couple minutes, as far as literal language, we all benefit from this, and we want to avoid using idioms, a phrase that the meaning isn't clearly connected to the actual words that we use. I've mentioned jargon several times and acronyms. The other thing is sarcasm. This is especially true for maybe people who don't speak English as their first language, or people who do have a hearing or hard of hearing or deaf. Sarcasm sometimes does not translate at all. So keep that in mind when you are communicating in person, or also in writing. We talked a little bit about readability of writing, and there are tools that can measure how easily your writing can be understood. So things like Microsoft Accessibility, readability formulas, or even WebFX readability are ways that can all be done. I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions, and then I am going to put these resources in the chat as well so that you all have those. So I'm going to stop sharing while I do that, and see if anybody has any questions for me.
Well, I just want to thank you, Kimberly, for doing this presentation. Thank you very much.
You are most welcome. Thank you all for joining today.
When you get a chance, Kimberly, David has asked to share your contact information page again.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. Yep. Let me go ahead and I can put that in I'm going to put hopefully it'll let me get all the resources in the chat.
Sure.
Did that. So I'm going to go ahead and send that. And excellent. My contact information, I'll put in next.
And I will, Kimberly can send the PowerPoint, this is her slide deck, to me, and I'll get it to Andrea so it can go up with all the other, with the recording and so forth.
Absolutely.
David has said thank you, ACEs.
All right. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, or my phone number is there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can or point you in the right direction if I'm unable to answer it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anybody, lots of comments. I don't know if you're seeing those. I hope you are.
Oh, how are healthcare providers involved in the retain process? Yeah, so retain works with people who have, in Kentucky, we work with people who have non-work related illness or injury. So oftentimes they are seeking active medical care, treatment, and so their healthcare providers are providing them with stay at work or return to work capacities. So how can they be successful by staying at work or returning to work? So those healthcare providers are giving them those parameters as to what they can do if they are to stay at work or return to work. So capacities, or what are their abilities? They also can help in the job accommodation process too. So we often will lean upon the healthcare providers to give us parameters as far as job accommodations that somebody may need based on their specific disability or illness or injury.
And we've got, Lisa's got a question. I'm gonna
yeah,
let her, maybe she can unmute. I'm not.
Yes,
Okay,
thank
great.
you.
Sure.
I was wondering with the Alternauts thing, sorry, Biodex, do you either have a sample or have access to the original backend Google document that was used to, for people to go in and ask those questions? I mean, I expect probably an agency could create one if they wanted to, but I was just wondering if there was an existing one out there.
Yeah, I went to their link. It's been a couple months, but I can follow up. Lisa, if you can put your contact info, send it to me. I'll follow up and let you know if they have something, so we don't have to recreate the wheel as far as a template. I know they have a completed template, but I'm not sure. I can't remember if they have one that's not completed. So let me get back to you on that.
No worries. And also, if you just wanted to reach out to Hillary, she could kick it out to the LibsWork team if you wanted to do it that way too. Whatever works best for you.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds great. You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm going to check and see what we have next month. And if somebody already knows, that's fine. You can go on and share too what presentations we have for coming up for March. It looks like we've got, looking at Andrea's email, we've got folks from Henry Stokes and Maria Freed from Texas State Library and Archives Commission. They're going to talk about ChatGPT for workforce and grant writing using AI for resumes and cover letters. So that will be on March 12th. And well, thank you all so much. I will stop the recording and